Okay, so you hear all this buzz about these JFK files, right? The newly released ones. I mean, 64,000 pages just appearing online.
Yeah,
It really makes you wonder what's in there, right? It's like having this huge jigsaw puzzle dumped in your lap, but no picture on the box to guide you.
exactly.
So in this deep dive, that's exactly what we're going to try to do. Piece together the most important parts of this mountain of documents, figure out what they're really telling
I
us.
sense it. I mean, this release back in March 2025 is thanks to an executive order from a while back, and it's a massive info dump.
Yeah.
It's not just like a few random memos or something. We're talking decades of classified stuff finally seeing the light of day.
And the National Archives, I gotta say, they've done a pretty good job making it all accessible. You can go online search with keywords and try to find your own answers in the, what is it, the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records collection.
Right.
But honestly, who has time to suddenly become an expert archivist? Not me.
Same here.
That's where we come in. Our mission today is to pull out the really important insights. What do these files tell us about the assassination itself? What about the, and I'm going to say this carefully, the potential conspiracies and the things that happened afterwards, like Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're not trying to rehash every single detail of this whole thing. It's more like, okay, what do these new documents actually add to what we already know about those crucial moments?
Right. So first question on everyone's mind, probably. What did the CIA know about Lee Harvey Oswald before November 1963? These files seem to give us some answers on that, especially about his time in Mexico City.
Yeah, they do. What these records show pretty clearly is that the CIA was keeping tabs on Oswald, especially during his time at the Soviet and Cuban embassies down there. So this idea that U.S. intelligence was totally in the dark about him, well, that's just not accurate.
And they knew he was talking to Soviet officials. It's kind of wild that they didn't see him as a bigger threat, knowing what we know now.
Yeah, looking back, it's interesting that while they were aware of these conversations, the general consensus at the time didn't really flag Oswald as super dangerous.
Hmm.
It really shows you how tough intelligence work can be, separating the real threats from all the noise even when you're watching
Well,
someone.
hindsight and all that.
Exactly.
And here's where things get really interesting for me, I think for a lot of listeners. Some records suggest that the CIA wasn't completely honest with the Warren Commission, that first group investigating the assassination about how much they were watching Oswald.
Right.
That definitely raises some eyebrows.
It does. There are hints in these files that the CIA held back some details about their monitoring from the Warren Commission. And this lack of total transparency has understandably fueled decades of speculation about what they were trying to hide.
Which, of course, leads us to the next big question. What was going on within the government? And again, I'm choosing my words carefully. Was there some kind of cover-up? Not necessarily a huge plot to kill the president, but maybe more about protecting their reputations. Does that match up with what these files suggest?
That's a super important distinction to make. The documents show that a bunch of government agencies were worried about what would happen if they revealed everything about Oswald's connections abroad. The CIA, they would have been worried about exposing their methods and their sources. Other agencies probably feared that revealing those connections to Soviet or Cuban figures could make the Cold War even worse, and things were already pretty tense.
And it wasn't just the CIA, right? The FBI seems to have had some info about Oswald before the assassination that they didn't really do anything about.
That's right. The files also showed that the FBI had gotten info before the assassination that raised red flags about Oswald and his potential for violence. The fact that they didn't act more decisively on this intelligence, well, that seems to have caused some internal finger-pointing and probably a lot of embarrassment for them afterwards.
So instead of some shadowy group controlling everything, it's maybe more accurate to see these agencies trying to clean up the mess and prevent their mistakes from coming out.
The documents definitely point in that direction.
Hmm.
It seems like high-level officials in both the CIA and the FBI tried to limit how deep the internal investigations went. Their motive probably wasn't to hide a huge conspiracy, but more to avoid having to explain all their intelligence failures leading up to the assassination. That's an important difference to remember.
We also can't ignore the whole Cold War situation going on at the time. Apparently, a big chunk of these files is all about U.S. covert operations against Cuba, and the Soviet Union even plots to assassinate Fidel Castro.
Absolutely. And if we look at the bigger picture, all these records about U.S. covert ops during the Cold War, they give us really important context. The level of fear and distrust between the superpowers was enormous. The intelligence agencies were terrified that if Oswald's ties to Cuba and the Soviet Union came out, it could be seen as an act of aggression. and make an already unstable situation even worse.
It's like they were playing this high-stakes game in the shadows, trying to avoid setting off a global catastrophe. And then right in the middle of all that, this happens.
Exactly. And there's something else in these documents that's pretty disturbing. There are signs that some documents related to the assassination were either destroyed or just lost. This obviously makes you wonder about how much transparency we can ever really expect, even if it doesn't prove a conspiracy.
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. Do these new files finally give us any solid proof that there was more than one shooter involved in JFK's assassination?
That's the question that's been driving all the debate and speculation for decades. And the answer, based on what we've seen in these newly declassified files, is no. They don't give us any new, credible evidence to support the idea of multiple shooters.
So even with all the doubts and skepticism, the official conclusion remains Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
That's what the evidence consistently points to. The files don't contain any new ballistic evidence. No reliable witness testimony that definitely points to another shooter or any other substantial information that would contradict the Warren Commission's main conclusion about Oswald being solely responsible.
But what about all that talk about acoustic evidence that the House Select Committee on Assassinations used at first? And what about all the people who said they heard shots coming from the grassy knoll? Do the files tell us anything new about those things?
Yes. The files do show that U.S. intelligence agencies were keeping an eye on public opinion and all the theories about the assassination, including people who didn't believe the lone gunman theory. They also mentioned the House Select Committee on Assassination's initial findings based on acoustic evidence, which seemed to suggest a second shooter. But it's crucial to remember that later, more thorough investigations completely debunked that acoustic evidence.
So that turned out to be a dead end. What about the eyewitness accounts? The whole grassy knoll thing has become such a big part of how people think about the assassination.
The files acknowledge all those witness testimonies that pointed to gunfire coming from the grassy knoll, but both the FBI and CIA consistently dismissed those claims. They said there were too many inconsistencies in what the witnesses said, changes in their stories over time, and no physical evidence to back it up.
So while it seems like some information about Oswald was definitely kept secret, the most likely explanation, even with these new files, is that they were trying to cover up intelligence failures, not the existence of a second shooter.
That's the most plausible interpretation based on what we know, including these new documents. The withholding of information seems to be mainly about protecting their sources and methods and avoiding admitting that they messed up in their surveillance of Oswald before the assassination. It doesn't change the core finding of a lone gunman.
Okay, so Lee Harvey Oswald, he didn't exactly live long enough to stand trial, did he? Jack Ruby put a stop to that pretty quickly.
Yeah, just 2 days after Oswald was arrested on November 24th, 1963, Jack Ruby shot and killed him. It happened in the basement garage of Dallas Police Headquarters while they were transferring Oswald to the county jail.
And it was just unbelievable. I mean, broadcasts live on TV, you couldn't make this stuff up.
Right.
What are the most important details to remember about that whole event?
The shooting happened around 11:21 a.m. Central Time. Ruby used a .38 caliber Colt Cobra revolver. And the fact that it happened live on national television with all those reporters and photographers there just added to the shock of it and instantly sparked even more questions and theories.
Ruby said he did it out of patriotism, to spare Jackie Kennedy from having to go through a trial. But obviously that explanation didn't convince everyone. The theories about Ruby's motives are almost as widespread as the ones about the assassination itself.
For sure. While Ruby said he wanted to avenge President Kennedy and protect his widow from more pain, there are tons of other theories. Some people think he was silencing Oswald on purpose to keep him from revealing a larger conspiracy. Ruby's ties to organized crime has also led to theories that the mafia ordered the hit and used Ruby to carry it out. And then there are theories that law enforcement or even intelligence agencies somehow manipulated or directed Ruby.
So what happened to Jack Ruby after all that? What was the legal outcome?
Ruby was arrested quickly and then convicted of murder in 1964. He was sentenced to death. But his conviction was overturned on appeal in 1966 because of problems with the trial. Sadly, before they could have a new trial, Jack Ruby died from lung cancer on January 3rd, 1967.
So he never got to testify again or face another trial. Did these new files that came out in 2025 tell us anything new about Jack Ruby and why he shot Oswald?
The new documents do give us some extra bits of information about Ruby. They confirm that he had worked as an informant for the FBI a few times, but there's nothing in these files to suggest that he was actively working for the FBI or any other government agency when he shot Oswald. The files also confirm that the CIA knew about Ruby's connections to people in organized crime, but again, there's no hard proof that he was acting on their orders to kill Oswald. And finally, U.S. intelligence agencies were definitely worried about organized crime being involved in the assassination, but they never found a direct link to what Ruby did.
So still no smoking gun that connects Ruby to a bigger conspiracy in these new documents. Lots of connections and concerns, but no definitive proof.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Even after decades of investigation and theories, the newly released files haven't given us any clear, undeniable evidence that Ruby was part of a bigger plot to silence Oswald or that he was working for someone else. His motives and what he did are still a big mystery.
Now, there's this rumor that keeps popping up that Jack Ruby was already dying of cancer when he shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Like he was a desperate man doing something crazy or making a last stand. Is there any truth to that?
That's a really common misunderstanding, and when you look at the facts about Jack Ruby's health, it just doesn't add up. There's no evidence that he had terminal cancer or any kind of cancer at all when he killed Lee Harvey Oswald back in November 1963.
So when did he actually get sick?
Ruby was diagnosed with a really aggressive type of lung cancer that spread to his liver and brain in late 1966. This was over 3 years after he shot Oswald. Then he was hospitalized at Parkland Hospital, the same hospital where President Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald had died in December 1966. And he died in January 1967 from a blood clot in his lung caused by the cancer.
But of course, that gap between the shooting and his diagnosis hasn't stopped people from coming up with conspiracy theories, right? I've heard some pretty wild ideas about how he might have gotten cancer while he was in prison.
Yeah, because his diagnosis came out of nowhere, and the cancer spread so fast, it's fueled all kinds of theories. Some people say he was injected with cancer cells to keep him quiet permanently. Others say he was denied proper medical care while he was locked up. And of course, there are theories that the CIA or the mafia somehow arranged for him to die before he could spill any secrets.
But medically speaking, there's no evidence to back up those theories, right?
Nope. The doctors who treated Ruby said his cancer looked like it developed naturally and was just super aggressive. There's no real medical evidence to support the theories about him being given cancer or being deliberately neglected.
One last thing. There's this rumor I've heard a few times that Jack Ruby's family somehow became millionaires after Oswald was killed or after Ruby died. Is there any truth to that? Did they benefit financially from all this?
Absolutely not. There's zero solid evidence that Jack Ruby's family got millions of dollars because of Lee Harvey Oswald's death or after Ruby died. The assassination and Ruby's trial were huge news stories, but there's no sign that his family got rich because of it.
So they didn't suddenly become wealthy because of all this.
Actually, it's the opposite. When the assassination happened, Jack Ruby wasn't doing that well financially. He owned a nightclub and had some connections in the Dallas underworld, but he wasn't a rich guy. He definitely didn't leave his family a lot of money. And on top of that, his trial was very public and probably cost a ton in legal fees, which would have made things even harder for his family. After he died, they mostly stayed out of the spotlight. There are no reliable reports or evidence that they got big payouts because of any of this.
So all those stories about his family becoming millionaires are just that stories with no basis in reality.
Exactly. Some conspiracy theories might talk about hidden payments because of Ruby's connections or what he did, but there's simply no proof that his family got millions of dollars because he killed Oswald or because he died.
Okay, so let's try to wrap all this up. What are the most important things for us as listeners to take away from this deep dive into the new JFK files?
Basically, what we've learned from these files is that we now have a much more detailed picture of the intelligence work that was going on around Lee Harvey Oswald before and after JFK's assassination. We know more about how the CIA was watching him, and the documents show us that there were concerns within the government and maybe even attempts to control the story and hide intelligence failures. But, and this is super important, these new files don't give us any believable reason to think that there was a bigger conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. They also don't prove the theory that there was more than one shooter.
So even with all the unanswered questions and all the speculation over the years, the official conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone is still the most likely explanation, even after looking at these new...
That's the key takeaway. These files do shed light on areas where information was kept secret and where government agencies might have chosen to protect themselves instead of being completely transparent. But they don't change the basic finding that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person responsible for assassinating President John F. Kennedy.
It really makes you think about the kind of pressure intelligence agencies were under during the Cold War, right? And how that might have affected their decisions and what they were willing to tell people, even if it wasn't part of some big conspiracy.
That's a really important perspective to keep in mind. The Cold War definitely shaped how intelligence agencies acted back then. If you want to learn even more about this, Checking out these new files for yourself on the National Archives website is a great way to see the original documents and come to your own conclusions about this turning point in history.
Great advice. I think we all could use a little more primary source investigation in our lives.
I, I agree.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. I hope this was helpful for everyone out there trying to make sense of these newly released JFK files. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.